Well, we'll start off with just some introductions. So right here to my left, I have Angel Palermo, Chief and Professor at Mount Sinai. She's passionate about DEI, medical education, as well as, I believe you teach in pediatrics as well, but you can clarify any of that shortly. And then we have Shanifa Riera, the Senior Advisor at the MTA. We work in communication and policy. And then over at the end, we have Cindy Zuniga Sanchez, a founder of Zero Based Budget Coaching. So we'll be chatting with them today about how they're a boss, how they be a boss. All right, but anyway, we'll go ahead and get started with, if you each can tell us a little bit about your work and what your days look like.
Good morning. Where do I begin? I work at Mount Sinai Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. I've been there for 23 years, and it wasn't planned that way. I work at the intersection of diversity affairs, medical education, and community-based public health. And so what that means is that I hold the space for our medical students and our graduate students to explore what I like to call the MD plus, and this plus is the intersection of medicine and social justice through an urban health lens. And so I oversee what you would consider, the diversity affairs office for the School of Medicine, and what I mean by hold the space is that we create opportunities for our students and our faculty to use medicine as a platform for social change. So even though they're training to become doctors, and I teach them while they're in medical school, I also try to create opportunities for them to understand health and medicine in non-health spaces. So what I mean by that is creating pathways for our students to work in community settings or with community partners to address health and well-being through the lens of other types of community issues, such as transportation policy, housing, workforce, emergency preparedness, all kinds of other topics that may not be traditionally seen as proximate to health care and medicine. And so the goal is really to cultivate a future physician workforce that sees beyond the patient-physician encounter, but really appreciates patient as community as well. So a typical day is, could be starting with a community meeting, pivoting to an advising session with a medical student or a pre-med student, to being at a senior leadership meeting and trying to make really important decisions around how we're going to run the medical school, to running a team meeting, back to a community meeting. So there's never a dull moment, which I appreciate. I think one of the things I learned for myself is that I'm not the one you hire to maintain the store, right? I like to create from nothing, turn things around. So I appreciate a very dynamic, stimulating work or professional environment because I can get bored pretty easily. So that's sort of really high level. Happy to expand on anything if there's any interest to do so. So I'll pass it on.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for having me here and joined with two amazing women. So as you mentioned in your introductory, I am Shanifa Riera, a senior advisor to the chairman at the MTA, as well as chief customer officer, which is a new role that was sort of imposed upon me 4 months, believe it or not, 4 months into joining the MTA. And that entails, so I have literally 2 full-time jobs, and to sort of segment that, as senior advisor to the chairman, the MTA, as we know, it's a huge authority that, just the workforce of 70,000 people. And what everyone knows the MTA for, especially from the city perspective, are the buses and the trains. But we go beyond that, which also includes the commuter railroads, bridges and tunnels, and a major component that a lot of people don't focus on is the construction and development, where we own so many properties, Grand Central Madison, Penn Station being one of the two of the major components, with a $55 billion capital program, just to put things into perspective. So from a senior advisor standpoint, really working closely with the chairman and, advising on major policy initiatives that are happening within the MTA, as well as, controlling the narrative from a communication standpoint, and lending my voice, my insight, my lived experience as it relates to, sitting down with meetings, whether it's with the mayor, the governor, or, external and internal leaders. From a chief customer perspective, I have an army of the willing that I directly manage of like 500 plus. And we are, my team is charged with all the assets that you see in the system, whether it's all those digital ads, putting the customer perspective to the forefront. So as it relates to, polling them from a survey standpoint on how we can better increase service from a tech standpoint, coming up with applications and different interfaces or interaction with the MTA of how to make it accessible, how to make it, user-friendly, from a customer complaint standpoint, making sure that, if there are needs anywhere within the system, that we are readily tapping into that and addressing those issues. So that's sort of like a big overview, a day in the life. It entails, as previously mentioned, there is never a dull moment. So it can be lots of internal meetings, lots of external meetings, lots of site visits to different parts of our system. And then we go way up into Connecticut with Metro North Country to all the way out, to Long Island. Creating events, lots of public hearings that are on the, brink of coming up as we approach fare hike increases or just service changes and service delivery issues. And, because it's the MTA is such a national, iconic, beast, it also entails travel and opportunities to talk about the system and also learn about best practices and building coalition with other transportation authorities. So that is a wide, big overview of, the day in the life at the MTA.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I am the founder of Zero Based Budget Coaching, LLC, which is a personal finance education platform for millennial women. So I talk all about money, budgeting, saving, investing, credit, debt, a lot of debt. And speaking of debt, the reason why I started my business is because I graduated law school in 2015 with $215,000 of debt. And as someone that was born and raised in a low-income community in the Bronx, I did not know what the heck I was doing, all right? I was like, wow, I just took on a mortgage, except I have no house. And so for me, my path to becoming a founder of my business really started with my own personal journey of trying to figure out, how am I going to pay off this debt? How am I going to start investing? How am I going to become wealthy unapologetically? Yeah. And so for me, it was that journey of self-discovery while I was practicing as a full-time associate at a corporate law firm that led me to start my business. And I left my law firm in May 2021 to run my business full-time. I'm an author, a speaker, a social media influencer, so I have a lot of hats. So a day for me, I'll actually draw from an example on Thursday of what my day looked like, which was a little hectic. I started in the morning drafting an email for my email community. Then I worked on a bunch of like workshop like material on Q1 planning what's going to happen in the business from now until March. What projects am I going to be working on? What events am I going to be taking on? Then I had a meeting with a prospective client for a speaking engagement, actually a law firm, which was really exciting. Then I created some social media content because I also do social media influencing, which I find really interesting, like lawyer turned social media influencer. And then I wrote a blog post for this website that features authors and speakers. So there are a bunch of different things that I can do in any one day. But an example of how the two have kind of linked is that I was reviewing also an agreement for a brand partnership. So I have been able to use the skills that I have as an attorney to translate into my work that I'm doing now as the founder of my company. And it's really exciting. I wear a ton of different hats. I'm the CEO, the COO, the CMO, the CTO. Like, I do all those things. There's never a dull moment, but it's really exciting because I get to pursue my mission of empowering millennial women on all things financial literacy. So yeah, it's a fun and exciting job, I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. And Cindy, I have a little add-on question here that I want to ask Angel and Shanifa. So how has your career changed over time? So for the students, you guys are at these very important jobs, at these moments that I know you've worked towards, right, over the years to be at this level. Can you reflect a little bit on your career as to how it's changed over time, maybe the different positions or just, iterations of your life, and just for we could get some insight on, where you came from, where you're going. And thank you, Cindy. You sort of did that already.
I was born and raised in the Air Force. My father, my parents, I'm Puerto Rican. My parents are Nuyorican, born and raised in the Bronx. And my father was drafted in the Vietnam War, and I was born in Spain. And we moved around, and so I finished high school in Central New York, where my father retired, and went straight to college. And I'm also a first-gen college graduate, and went to SUNY Brockport and majored in biology because I was good at science in high school, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor. And then that went out the window when I took my first sociology class, and I realized I love this. I want to think about systems and structures and society and why people do what they do. And I decided to double major in biology and sociology, and then I stumbled onto a summer enrichment program at the University of Michigan, which still exists, that exposed, at the time, it focused on students underrepresented minority students, Black and brown students, and exposed them to public health and healthcare. And I did that program. And now I went from a very small state college to like the University of Michigan, and I was blown away. And then I fell in love with public health because it was like this combination of science and sociology. I was like, yeah, I love it. This is exactly what I want. And that's when I realized that I really like to sit at the intersection of things. I'm not an either or type of person when it comes to sort of professional interests. And so I decided that I wanted to do a master's in public health. And I applied to Michigan, and I got in, and I pursued a master's in public health and health management and policy. And I did that because my grandfather passed away while I was in college, and he passed away, he was a cook at New York Presbyterian. And the story in the family is that he had been poorly diagnosed and not well taken care of well. And I just thought it was ironic that he fed the doctors, right, that as a cook, and he still wasn't taken care of well. And that is when I first got really present to injustice. And I didn't think that was right. And I think that they contributed to premature death of my grandfather. And so I decided to turn that, which ended up becoming sort of, it's a strong word, like rage. It was more than anger, maybe less than rage, but it turned into a passion of like, this is just not right. And so I decided to pursue health management policy because there's many areas in public health you can focus on, because I want to understand how laws were made, decisions, policy, like who got to say where the resources are and where they go. And so when I finished at Michigan, I'm making all these points because life is, you can't have a plan. I mean, you can have a plan, but life is not linear. So, and there are many zigzags, and you start to learn to embrace the zigzag. And so that's the take-home point of what I'm trying to say, is that when I finished in Michigan, I didn't plan on the next step. It serendipitously really showed up. And that's when I moved to transition to work at Mount Sinai. And I started as a staff member. I was a policy research associate in a very small think tank in the Department of Health Policy at the time. And my first boss was a Michigan alum. And so that made a difference. And I didn't realize, okay, so networks matter, right? And where you choose to invest your time and get trained matters. Having a particular level of credentials and credibility matters. And so when I worked at Mount Sinai, I started as an employee and stumbled into teaching because my portfolio of work was focusing on health disparities among Medicare beneficiaries. So that's Medicare is a social insurance program for 65 and older in this country. And so I started to learn a lot about that area. And as I said, I did a lot of community-based public health in Michigan and started to do that in East Harlem with older adults. And then when I started to develop this sort of content expertise on health disparities and community-based public health, people were asking me, oh, can you do a lecture on that or a talk on that? And then I realized, oh, this is teaching, right? And oh, this is academic medicine. And there was a Latina, she's still there, Dr. Angela Diaz, who runs the Mount Sinai Adolescent Health Center. We met, and she really was like, you should be a faculty member. And I had no idea what you're talking about. And she's like, no, you're an excellent educator. I'm gonna submit a letter to the chair to appoint you as an instructor. Now, she happens to be a pediatrician, which is the only reason why I have an appointment in pediatrics, is because she advocated for me, and the chair approved, and they accepted me as an instructor. Now, it's a title, but in academia, so if those of you in college or planning to go to college, they have titles like professor so-and-so. And there's different rankings, and you get promoted based on your accomplishments and meeting the performance requirements. But that was the first time I realized I'm not a staff member anymore. Like, I'm not just an employee. I'm now a part of the academic teaching community. And that was like really like, wow, okay, all right. And I started really thinking like, oh, I can actually really impact the teaching environment, like the learning of future physicians. And that was when I realized that was much more impactful than being a doctor. And it was ironic that now here I am working in a medical school, teaching in a medical school, and soon became a member of the admissions committee. And now was helping to make decisions on who comes into medical school. You know, when 10 years before that, I was like, oh, I think I'm pre-med, I don't really know, you know? And here I am, you know, working in a medical school and teaching. And so the zigzags is I eventually became, now I'm an associate professor, I'm a senior faculty member, and I'm a senior associate dean. And I decided that I was gonna stay in academia. And I realized that in order to do that, I needed to be like legit. And what that meant was I had to get a doctorate. I had to be known as Dr. Palermo because I was not going to medical school, okay? And everyone around me is teaching faculty were doctoral level individuals. They had MDs or PhDs. And that's when I decided I need to go get my doctorate. And I did. So between 2007 and 2012, I did my doctorate at CUNY Graduate Center. At the time, I was a part of the first cohort that was going to, the first cohort of students to establish the School of Public Health in the CUNY Graduate Center system. And so what I did was I did my whole doctoral work on emergency preparedness in East Harlem. And it was a bridge because I was already doing that work in East Harlem. I just decided to turn it into a research study. And I think the most beautiful thing of that whole experience was the day I defended my dissertation. My research is basically a presentation. I had the room filled with East Harlem friends and colleagues, and it was just a beautiful thing. And I remember that they make the decision in the moment whether or not you pass. So I'm sitting in the hallway, and I'm like, my parents are like, what's happening? My mother was like, what's going on? You know, first she was sitting in the back listening to the presentation. She didn't understand anything that I was saying. And they still think I'm a doctor of patients. And I'm like, no, I have a doctorate in public health. I'm not a medical doctor. And so we're all standing in the hallway, and my dissertation chair opens the door, and she says, congratulations, Dr. Palermo. I'm like, holy shit, you know, like, it really is true, you know? It's all of a sudden. And this is what happens. There are moments in your life where, like, all of a sudden there's a shift, and, like, a new identity sort of comes into fruition. And at that moment, I was Dr. Palermo showed up. And I said, wow, this is what this is. And when I went back into my work environment and was just sharing the good news that I now have my doctorate, the listening changed, right? Like, my colleagues now had a different listening. I was saying the same thing, honestly. But now it's Dr. Palermo. And it just shifted the trajectory in a way that had higher impact. And I think at the end of the day, you know, I was committed to having a higher impact leadership role in whatever space I was in. And I realized the feather of having a doctorate really was an accelerating factor in that space. And so I could not have planned any of that. It was all about positioning and zigzagging. And having spaces also where you can check in with trusted friends and colleagues who, in my opinion, coach you. And I can talk about coaches all day. But so now I am, you know, I've been at Mount Sinai for 23 years. I've had 2 bosses, you know, and I still get to do what I want in the sense that I'm not doing one thing or the other. And, you know, I'm going to be 50 in 2.5 years. And so in my mind's eye, like, that's the next inflection point. Like, there's going to be a pivot. I don't know what that looks like, but I can feel it. You know how you kind of see something coming, you can feel something coming down the road? That's how I feel. And I say that because when I turned 40, I realized that, you know, you are who you are and you are who you're not. I know no one in the room is the young people in here. Trust me, when you hit 40, you're like, And to take the meaning away, like the emotion of like, oh, you're 40, like half your life is over also, like, just to be kind of like straight about it. So I realized at that moment at 40, I was like, oh my God, half my life is over, like literally. So I gotta make time count. Like, you don't get time back. So now it's about, you know, for you to make a bold and courageous move, to pause and say, I'm making this pivot, doing my own thing. That's a big deal because you don't get time back. And so now, you know, when I'm like, okay, 2.5 years, I'm gonna be 50. Do I still wanna be at Mount Sinai? What do I wanna do next, you know? So I have no plan for that. There's a lot of thinking in my brain happening, but I think also you need to have people around you that you can share that with and use each other as thought partners. And I have one with me today, my beloved Delia, who, you know, we think about this and talk about this all the time because you can't stay in your head about it. That's a dangerous place to be, actually. You got to talk it out. So I'll stop there and definitely want to hear.
I'm impressed and then just moved. But, you know, as boss Dr. Palermo said, I mean, we all can make plans. Plans can be imposed upon us by our family and our village and our tribe about, you know, what our trajectory should be, especially for me from, you know, growing up in a, you know, strong, strict Caribbean background. There are certain titles that, you know, are sort of seen as success. And for me, you know, it's like doctor or lawyer. I'm happy to be sandwiched in between the two. But that, you know, I started down the path of law and was thinking like, okay, like this is what my family see as success. But again, as you know, the good doctor said, it's about life is not linear. And to be perfectly honest, and if any of you can walk away with, it's about finding your purpose. And you may not know what that is. it may come, as those of us that are 40, and there is a change, there is a shift, and you learn to see that. And for me, my purpose has always been advocacy and grounded in community organizing and community work. I didn't know what that was, but I was always drawn to going to community meetings, like if there is an injustice or something, insignificant or small in my neighborhood, wanting to change that. And who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to write? Who do I need to protest to make these changes? And, it just brought me professionally through these like weird channels. And the most local form of government, which a lot of people aren't aware about in New York City, is the community board. So there were a bunch of issues that I, had learned about, locally in my neighborhood, and whether it was like community leaders or like go to the community board, go to this body, share your concerns, and went. They were all people that didn't look like me, that represented my neighborhood, didn't really represent my interests, even though that was sort of like their purpose, and being present and seeing this body. So the way that I sort of became an insider, like I joined the staff and became an assistant district manager. And then from there, having access to elected officials, an opportunity came up where I became a director for the Manhattan Borough President, and did that, and that grew to me becoming a deputy comptroller of public affairs for the New York City Comptroller's Office. And after doing 25 years with the city, going to the MTA, which is like, from there, wanted to go into private sector. I felt like I was tapped out when it came to government, but again, still in the vein of service, and it is my purpose, it is who I am, and I've learned to accept that and not resist it. And even sitting across the table or being in the room with, what we all see as affluent leaders, still finding our purpose and making sure, it works for us, and being grounded as the previous panelist said, you have to surround yourself with great people that keeps you humble, that inspire you, that pushes you, that can be honest with you, that, you can, really download without judgment. And that is such a good, humbling experience, because there are days you're in these spaces constantly. I am constantly in spaces with people that don't look like me. I am a unicorn. And, being able to sort of step back, make that phone call, get that level of reassurance, or if something goes left, picking up the phone and it's like, listen, I'm ready to pop off, and the Bronx is about to come out in me. Yeah. But, and getting on that call and having, your folks be like, okay, center you, this is how, you should approach, and this is how, you have to deal with it. Because again, what hasn't been mentioned, but as women of color, there is this stigma that is attached to us as we are in these spaces. I have been in spaces, and I am, not that it's disparaging, but seen as an assistant, as a secretary, or or a title sort of being seen as less than, and it is I mean, I can tell you stories for days, but it is life changing, to find your voice and be your authentic self. Oftentimes we are shown or taught that we have to sort of assimilate, and that's not the case. I mean, I think, diversity in these spaces, diverse thoughts and views go a long way in these spaces. So again, like, find your purpose, tap into that, and it will not lead you wrong.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't tell you how many times going into a courtroom, they thought that I was the interpreter.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I'm the lawyer, So I definitely feel you on that. But, for me, as the daughter of immigrants, I had one job, which is go to college. Like, that was my job. My sole purpose throughout elementary school, high school was get into a good school, get good grades, and get the high-paying job. Like, break the cycle of poverty. That was really my mission. And so, like any good daughter of immigrants, my whole life it felt like a checklist, to go on the theme of being linear. It was, go to school, graduate at the top of your class, get the high-paying job. And so for me, it was like, okay, if I just follow the checklist, if I just follow this path, I'll be happy and everything will work out. And for a long time, that is exactly what I did. I went to undergrad, graduated with honors, then I went straight to law school, also graduated with honors. And in law school, I didn't know, I went to law school because I actually wanted to run for office. I wanted to get into politics. That's why I went to law school. I didn't go to law school because I necessarily wanted to practice law. I wanted to run for office. I wanted to be the first U.S. Latina senator. That was originally my goal. And I was like, well, yeah, I might as well get a law degree to do that. And then while I was in law school, I was exposed to this whole area of the law called corporate law, aka where the money is. And for me, growing up low income, I was like, oh, yes, please tell me more. What is this whole field that you're all talking about? For me, it was really only my white colleagues that knew about that world. My fellow Black and brown colleagues, we weren't really exposed to that area of the law. We were expected to go into public interest areas like immigration, criminal defense, criminal prosecution. We were expected to go into certain areas of the law where there were more people that looked like us, but not this coveted area of the law called corporate law. And, it's kind of like when people tell you don't touch, that makes you want to touch, right? That's exactly what happened to me. For me, I was like, well, this is a great opportunity. Let me go for it. And, come to find out that you needed to have really stellar grades, great networking skills, really good interpersonal skills. And I was like, all right, I can work on all those things. And I landed one of those coveted jobs after graduation. And I started at my law firm. Now, again, perspective. Growing up low income in the Bronx, I started at the age of 26 with a salary of $160,000 a year. Back then, that's not the starting salary anymore. The starting salary is $200,000. Again, I need you to understand, I grew up low income. That kind of money did not just change my life, it changed my family's life. So when 6 years later, I told my parents, you know what? I'm ready to leave this. They were like, ¿qué? ¿Cómo? Why? And it was really hard to explain to my immigrant parents whose whole life was hustle, that I was ready to break away from that. And that I had laid the foundation financially for me to break away from that and to start my own thing. Which for context would pay me like a fifth of what I was making as a lawyer. And so that involved a lot of boldness. It involved a lot of audacity, right? But I think it also involved a lot of me being really honest with the kind of work that I wanted to do. And like what you said earlier about finding your purpose. I do believe that in those 6.5 years that I was practicing law, I was living in my purpose. But it's also possible that your purpose can shift. It can change. And for me, I was just ready for something new and something different. And what's funny is that when people ask me, where do you see yourself 10 years from now or 20 years from now, I don't have an answer anymore. I used to have my plan A, my backup plan, or I had 10 backup plans to the backup plan. Now I'm just as long as I'm living in my truth and I'm serving, I'll figure it out. Yeah. And I think that that's something really powerful to keep in mind, is to be really authentic to yourself, to your community, to what your purpose is. And especially for me, everything that happened with the pandemic, a lot of us lost loved ones. It really put things into perspective of life is really short and it's really precious. So sometimes you do need to make those changes, and I'm really glad that I did. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm super inspired, and I loved hearing the background of all of your stories. And so we'll dive in a little bit more here. So you all spoke to, so I guess I didn't give anyone a background on myself, but it was very inspiring. I'm currently in graduate school, so in my own sort of inflection point, transition. And so I wanted to ask you all, it sounds like you've pivoted. You've transitioned from career to career, or met the right people, or networked the right way, or was inspired by the right coach. How would you advise our students who are currently in college, or some of our high school seniors who might be here, what advice would you give to someone transitioning, careers, out of college? Any advice for career changes or pivots? Anybody want to start?
I mean, I would say, again, you could have this predetermined plan. Plans are great, but it will go out the window quickly. So I think I think networking and access and trying to try different things and expanding your universe, your territory. I think oftentimes we grow up in neighborhoods and we sort of move around in this like 10-block radius. Like oftentimes I meet so many people who live in New York City but have never really explored New York City, and even outside of New York City, New York State, and the rest of the country, and just exploring. I mean, as promoting the MTA, whether it's your Metro card or getting on the commuter rail or getting on Amtrak, getting on a plane, travel, explore, meet different people, and through not really with the purpose of looking at it through a professional lens, but those opportunities can awaken something in you, whether it's even with food or different culture or music, and meeting different people that may not look like you. And my 10-year-old daughter is here with me today, and as she is even growing and building her social circles, I am constantly pushing her to every so often meet 3 new people that are outside of your circle. Let's not get wedded into what's comfortable with us, and that is another thing that we need to do, is get out of our comfort zone. Being comfortable does us a disservice, and that's why it is so important to expand your network, and create that circle that will push you out of your comfort zone. Change is not easy. Change is scary. Change is uncomfortable. But change, like, we are so stronger than we actually believe. And when it comes to change and being in these uncomfortable places, we're so resilient, and we tap into things that we didn't even know that are in us. So explore, expand your circles and your network.
Yeah, that's a great thought along those lines. I would say that if whatever you're looking to do, talk to someone that's doing that, and I know that involves being bold and, often making the first move. But for me, for example, when I was in law school, again, I didn't know about corporate law because I was never exposed to it. So how can you ever do something that you're never exposed to? You don't even know it exists. So for me, it was like, okay, so then I should talk to lawyers that do that kind of work. Ask them, what does their day look like? What do they like about their job? What do they find challenging about their job? Go in with these specific questions, and you will be shocked at how much you can learn. Because sometimes you might just be like, okay, that's not for me. Like, that lifestyle is not for me. I don't like that. Well, then look at something else. So no matter where you are, or if you're in college and you're looking to go to grad school, talk to grad students. Don't just say, well, I just want to go to grad school just for the heck of going to grad school, because you don't know what else to do. Talk to people that are doing the thing that you want to do.
I co-sign all of that. And I think, life still happens, meaning you know, other parts of your life are going to show up. And what I mean by that is you might meet someone, you know, like relationships. And that could be a distraction, positive or negative, right? We still connected to a community of family, you know, and they have expectations. And depending on what kind of household, I mean, I think we can all relate as women of color, you know, being selfish is seen as bad and wrong. Yes. And one of the things that I want you all to consider is to be selfish.
Yes.
And there is a way to be selfish and still show up in your family and in relationships. But trust me when I tell you, please don't give up being selfish. Because when you give that up, it's hard to like restore that in a way where it is all that you need or want to have that purpose.
Yeah.
And I think if being selfish means a lot of different things, I think we all talk about it in different ways. I don't mean it as, you know, not caring about others. I don't mean it as, you know, really that, not caring about others and leaving other people behind and, you know, it's me, 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 me. That's not what I mean. I have this conversation all the time with my pre-med advisees who are like, you know, my parents don't understand that I have to spend time studying for the MCAT or this or that. And I said, yeah, because you have to be selfish with your time. So that means let's have a conversation with your family about what it means to be a doctor, because they don't know. How would they know if they didn't have the exposure?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So let's talk, and I'm happy to have the conversation with them and break it down in plain language, like this is what it means. And that forever your positionality in your family will change, because this journey becoming a doctor requires a lot of time and time away from your family, you know? And so relationships are still gonna happen. And when you go to college, I feel like college is this identity formation space, especially if you choose to go away to college. I totally encourage, go away, because it's good to learn to like be resourceful and independent and start to develop this selfish mentality. Like you gotta figure out, I gotta learn how to do this and that. But also, you know, your other parts of yourself emerge because of the exposure you've had, right? I came out as a lesbian at 19. I'll never forget it. I was a sophomore in college. And my mother called me and she said, I was at the University of Notre Dame doing a summer program. And again, exposure. I was like, Notre Dame, like Indiana. I was like, oh, I was in Michigan, Indiana, you know? And I'm like, oh, wow. And they didn't acknowledge LGBT student groups on campus. And being social justice oriented, you know, I was an advocate on campus, I was a student leader, and I'm like, this is wrong, you know? And I was raised Catholic, of course. So I was like, oh, you know, dealing with religion and all of these things was coming up because I was taking classes, right? Because I was a biology and sociology major. So I was dealing with all of these, like, these really paradoxical kind of like thoughts and constructs and social agreements that I didn't understand how they came about and was questioning. And so my mother calls me to check in, and she says, you know, what's going on? How are you? I said, Ma, can you believe that they don't acknowledge LGBT student groups on campus? And she said, well, what do you care about that? So what? And I said, then it snowballed. And I shared with her that I was in a relationship with a woman. And she was just like, quiet. And then I was like, I can't believe I just told my mother this. And then I felt very alone because I was in Gary, Indiana, on a campus that was like, oh my God, what do I do? And I say all that to say is that, you know, that was a moment in my life that I had experienced, that I had the opportunity to experience in a way that wasn't like clouded by my family stuff, right? I went away to college. I started to meet people. I started to experience things. I started to check in, like, oh, this is actually what really, I'm drawn to this, or this is what attraction feels like, or this is what, you know, feeling something inside that's, you know, delicious and warm. I like that, you know, like, and then making sense of it, but not having it clouded with like family expectations and norms was a big game changer. And I didn't realize it until after college, because, and actually after I came out, because when I came out, you know, it shifted things, and there's a whole story behind that. But I was so thankful and grateful that I was able to have that experience and own it. and really stand firm in it and not be like, oh, you're right, I'm not gay, you're right. It's a phase, you're right, you know? And give in. And I'm very thankful that life zigzagged that way, and it's a really proud moment for me, actually, because it formed a part of my identity that is centered on own your greatness and own yourself. Like, no one should tell you who you are, is my point. And that was a cornerstone of that identity that started to emerge because of this new phase called college. And they couldn't tell me anything about it because they didn't go to college. You know, it was like, you don't know what you're talking about, you know? Now, the other piece I just want to add is that I would come home, and ironically, yes, the charge was to go to college. I would come home and be like, wow, you sound so white.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you mean? You sound so white, sound so like, why are you using all those big words? I'm like, you want me to go to college, and here I am educating myself and learning all these things. I have all this exposure, and now you feel like I'm white? Like, it was so ironic. So, you know, they want you to have education, and at the same, what's paradoxical is that it's proximity to whiteness.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Like, to have wealth, that's proximity to whiteness. And my parents didn't see it like that. They wanted whiteness. And they associated education, wealth, own the house. It's like, but they're like, they don't sound white though. So it's just really interesting because that also will come up as you gain exposure, as you you make that leap. And when they don't have that understanding or context, then they're like, I don't know how to connect with you anymore. I don't know how to engage with you. What's going on? And it really means taking the time, if it matters to you, to slowly expose them and also show that you haven't lost yourself. Like, you're still, you're still you because of where you grew up and the roots that you have. But that doesn't mean that should not, again, it's about being selfish and owning your greatness, and I'll just stop there.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So reminder there, be selfish. Expose yourself to things that are uncomfortable, right? And then also expose yourself to those things that you want to do, right? So seeking those mentors, those coaches as well. So thank you so much for being so vulnerable and forthcoming. That was beautiful. So just to dive a little bit deeper into your work and sort of what it means to be a woman at work. How does race and gender dynamics show up in your workplace? A heavy hitter. Would anyone like to start? Cindy or?
So I'll share how it showed up in my law firm atmosphere, because running my own business, it's me, right? So it's a little different. If I have an issue, I can talk to the boss, which is me, right? So I'll let you know how it showed up in the law firm setting. Working in corporate law as a Latina was very isolating. And it was very difficult because it was predominantly white, specifically predominantly male, older male. And, most of the partners at my old law firm were older white men. And I think it was, for me, I thought I had to check myself at the door. I thought I had to check my identity at the door. Like, I have to leave my Latina-ness, my Bronx-ness, my everything. I have to leave that outside because it has no place in the law firm. And I was so wrong. I was so wrong because it was my diversity that gave incredible insight to a lot of our cases, including cases that we had with Latin American clients. Yes, because guess what? Latin America is incredible, and it's massive, and it's very diverse, and it has companies, which my law firm represented, So I realized, this is actually great because I'm fluent in Spanish. I can interpret these documents, and not just as a translator, but actually you have the cultural element of understanding how to interact with certain leaders at these companies because you are of their same culture and you can connect with them in that way. And I'll never forget realizing that my differentness was actually empowering and it was valuable. And I had a lot to contribute. So there were a lot of positives that did come up with me boldly stepping into my identity, but there were also challenges. You know, I'm not going to say everything was rainbows and butterflies, because it wasn't. For me, you know, for example, during the pandemic, when everything happened in 2020 with the protests, you know, Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and whatnot, I will never forget being on a Zoom call with my group. Okay, so my specific law firm group. So, you know, there's the larger law firm, and then there's the New York office, which I was a part of, and then there's the specific practice group, which I was a part of, which was commercial litigation. And I'll never forget being a part of this Zoom call, and I said, we need to have these discussions not just on diversity and inclusion, but on anti-racism. Let's get very clear that those are separate things. And I should not have to be an ambassador of the Black community because we don't have any Black colleagues on this call. So that was really shocking to a lot of my colleagues on the call, right? Of like, oh my gosh, she's right. But that's the kind of boldness that sometimes you do have to have in those spaces. And I was a little nervous. I was like, oh, I hope I don't get fired after this, right? Like, I hope they don't just say, like, you know, we really didn't like that. No, on the contrary, what happened is that some of my colleagues, including some of the older white male partners, were like, thank you, Cindy. Thank you for bringing that up. How can we be better? What can we do? Let's talk practical steps. And I was like, well, we need to hire more diversity, first of all. That's very important. But let's educate ourselves also. And so we had kind of like a homework assignment. And so we all watched the documentary 13th, which is about the 13th Amendment. Highly recommend it. It's like, you can watch it for free. I think it's on like YouTube. And really put things into place. So I think that often, and I understand this can be a burden to carry, and some people will disagree with me, and that's fair. I actually have friends that will disagree with me. They'll say, like, I shouldn't have to carry that burden of being the advocate or the representative of my community. I decided that would be something I would carry on and I would take on, because I also felt like I didn't really have a choice. You know, I was the only Latina in my group, and at the time, I was the only Latina associate in the New York office of a law firm of over 800 attorneys. It's very lonely, you know, but for me, I decided to take it on. And I think that seeing, you know, in my farewell email to my firm, I actually included, you know, I sincerely hope that the diversity efforts that have been started continue, because I wanted to leave that message. And, you know, and I loved my law firm. I loved my colleagues. I loved the work that I did, even though it was very challenging. I never felt out of place in the sense of like, oh, they don't want me here. I never felt that, which I'm very grateful for, because I know a lot of others don't have that experience. I'll never forget one time I went into the courtroom down by Canal Street, one of the courthouses down by Canal Street, and I was with a older white male partner. So it was the partner and me. I was the associate, and one of the staffers of the courthouse was like, okay, we need the attorneys for both parties to step over here because they needed to tell us something from the judge. And so Mike, the partner, started going, and I started walking right behind him. And then the two attorneys from the other side started going as well. And one of the staffers went, no, just the attorneys, to me. And I was so in shock, also because it was a fellow person of color that said that to me, and that will happen, and it'll burn, and it'll hurt. But what happened next was really, really moved me. Mike was like, she's with me. She's an attorney. Okay, so come on. And he was very like firm about it. And the staffer was like, oh, like, you know. And I think that finding allies is also part of the process. And it's difficult. You're not always going to find it. But I think that when you bring your identity, when you choose to not check it at the door, like what I thought I had to do when I was a young associate, you'll see that a lot of people, maybe even if this isn't what they're used to, they'll be open to having these conversations with you. And then sometimes when push comes to shove, they'll show up for you, like that partner did for me that day. So yeah, it's important. Don't lose your identity just because you're stepping into a predominantly white space.
Completely share what your lived experience, and I would also say that being the minority, especially in a lot of these spaces, because for me, at the MTA, on the executive floor, I am it, and even looking at me from so many standpoint, Black woman, Caribbean woman, woman, and even from an age standpoint, I think the next person senior to me as far as age is like maybe 20 or 30 years older than me. So as you said, like when you're sort of in these spaces, you are at that crossroad. It's like, why do I have to be, like, what is my responsibility? What is my duty? Do I have to be the lead and be the poster child? Because again, even with the hiring, it's like, I know why I'm here and why I make what I bring to the company. It makes it appealing, and not only being on your website or, speaking at press conferences, know what comes with that, but also too knowing the responsibility and accepting the responsibility in being the diversity in these spaces. So, from my experience, all the executive assistants on my floor look like me, but as far as the executive leaders, I am a unicorn. And being in that space, again, it goes back to your circle and being comfortable, finding your strength, having to always be prepared, and constantly sharpening your craft. It's not enough to just get in the door and sit at the table. Sitting at that table comes with responsibility and understanding who you're representing. Because when you speak, when you open your mouth, because again, people will constantly question, no matter where you went to school, how many years you've put in, how long you've perfected your craft, because you look different. What gives her the authority to sit at the table with me? So again, never sit at my, one of the best advice that was given to me is, oftentimes, back in the day, would show up in meetings, conference room, table, there are chairs on the side. I always used to sort of sit at the chairs at the side, because I'm like, oh, I didn't feel that I was worthy enough to sit at that table. And it was another woman of color who said, no, you sit at that table. And, you walk in with authority and you have a seat at that table unapologetically. Now, having a seat at that table, you mean you have to speak. And before speaking, I never go into a meeting not prepared. What's the agenda? What are we discussing? There might be topics that I am not well versed in, but before that, researching, getting an understanding, and participating. Participating is key. So that is the responsibility that comes with that. Also, opening the door for others. And I think oftentimes when many of us reach that pinnacle, don't understand, again, the responsibility that comes with that. I am constantly saying I have people that look like me, that are just as educated, just as professional, that can be in the C-suite as well. So constantly, HR is not my thing. That is not what I was brought in for, but I assume that responsibility when it comes to recruiting and poaching for these executive jobs and incrementally changing the world. In the space that I've been there, for a little over a year, I can say that I have brought in 3 people that look like me, and it's unfortunate that on top of my 2 other full-time job, I have taken on that role as well. So, again, that is a responsibility that we have, that, leaning back in, going back into our communities and our networks, and bringing people with us, because diversity and having, people that look like us, and as you said, shapes companies' perspectives and views, which I found astonishing that as the MTA, our workforce, from a labor perspective, it's 80% people of color, but why does the executive team not represent that? So that is, key and critical.
Move on, or?
Well, I feel like you're an expert in this field, so I would love to hear your 2 cents.
I just want to,
Have a brief,
co-sign everything. I just want to amplify one thing you said, which is being at the table. And I think what we don't always realize that we do, I think, as women, is that we make ourselves small.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that was told to me once is that even the unspoken gets communicated, right? So how you show up, literally how you sit in the chair, right? And we're already dealing with body complex issues as women, right? I recognize I'm a large-breasted woman. I get that. I can own it now, right? I get that I have curly hair. And there were many times, to your point of like giving up your identity, I was like, I would wear a ponytail. I never straighten my hair because I can't deal with being with the hot iron that long. But, I played down myself, and I played small. And they didn't even tell me to play small. I played small to myself. And that's what's so crazy, is that we have been socialized, when we didn't even realize we were being socialized, into not being enough, not being worthy, and being small. And so you sit in the corner, you don't sit in the front row, you're kind of like this, you're not even realizing what you are communicating to me at this moment, right? And so I'm very intentional now about sitting upright. Well, one, 'cause I know I have large breasts, and I gotta make sure my back is strong, because I don't want it like this, but at the same time, I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here. And to your point, preparation, my
Yeah.
gosh,
Yeah.
preparation is key.
Yeah.
Because, and I know that I'm like, there's something I need to say here, I'm gonna say that, and because I came in prepared,
Yeah.
and I'm not small,
Yeah.
right? So I really, really if you can start to think, like turn your mind's eye inward and say, just notice yourself. Like just notice even how you've been sitting in this session, and just notice what you do and don't do. And I think that is so important, because you can't find that in a book or read about it. But it is a really nuanced factor that makes a difference. And I know, like she said to me, first thing we walked in, she said, I know I've seen you before. Right? Now, there are things that people will never forget about you. Maybe your name, maybe something you said, or just your presence.
Yeah.
And I get that all the time. And I realize, that's a strategy that leaves impact, right? That now there's a right to have impact, to be of service, to give. And I offer that as advice because it really does make a difference when you actually, because of that, you moved, touched, and inspired someone, And you made a difference in that person's life, and you wouldn't have done that had you not, if you played yourself small.
Yeah.
So trust me, even though we get a lot of messaging about, women of color, and it's a burden, at the same time, we are our own worst enemy.
Yeah.
And so you can disrupt that if you recognize and notice that about yourself and really pause and reflect, or even ask trusted friends, like, what did you think about me being in that meeting? But you didn't say one word.
Yeah.
You also didn't look like you wanted to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or you weren't prepared. Right?
Thank you so much. And so we'll wrap up with one more question, but I did also just want to add, being in grad school at NYU, so it's an incredibly diverse class, but like no one has the experience that you have. like as a woman, as a person, and whether there are other Latinos or Black people or et cetera in your classroom, like you matter. And I feel like I'm reminding my classmates, which are all a lot younger than me, and they make me feel very old. But because there's a lot of that, a lot of just silent in the classroom, and I think this is a lot about education and how people view it, and it is still something very valuable, and I feel like if it's assisting my life and taking me places that I want to go. But yes, we will wrap up. But yes, please speak in class, please, like for your own classmates, for the professor, for the sake of the professor, please contribute, because what you have to say matters. But we'll just wrap up with a quick, what does it mean to be a boss to you? We could start with Cindy.
Sure, yeah. So to me, awesome. So to me, it means being confident. There's a difference between confidence and arrogance. Arrogance is when people, they don't want to hear you speak, because you're full of yourself. You're full of, well, I'm just praising me, everything's all about me. Versus confidence is, I know I can bring value to people, and I'm going to step into that. I'm going to own my truth. I'm going to be bold. I'm going to be prepared, right? That's a big part of being confident, is having those points that you want to bring up at that meeting or in class and saying, I've researched this. I have a good understanding of this. I'm going to go ahead and ask or raise my hand or whatever it may be. So I think it really means being confident and owning that confidence.
For me, being a boss is mentoring. And, I feel like we spend in our professional lives so much time with people in our awake moments than we do with our family and friends at home. And, it's all about having, for those of us who have the luxury of building a team of people that will learn the craft, be true professionals, but also when the moment comes, outgrow you. And I, like every member of my leadership team that I've, since I've been managing for the past 25 years, investing in them, like, being so attuned where you're challenging them, where you're giving honest feedback, where you are aware whether or not they have outgrown a skill set, because selfishly, we want people to be in roles to make, as a boss, as leaders, our lives more comfortable, but really stepping out and saying, and tapping someone and saying, okay, you've outgrown this role. It is time for you to go and do bigger and greater things. And I have had that luxury of, many folks that I've supervised are, industry leaders and titans, in their own spaces. So that is, it is being unselfish. And being, a good human being, which oftentimes is not synonymous with being a boss.
I love these simple, wicked questions. I think, I think if you asked me that 20 years ago, my answer would be different, as I was just sort of reflecting. And I think the actual act of self-interrogation is being a boss, meaning, so I don't want the word boss to be associated with, maybe what you might be thinking professional, like we're all, senior leaders. I'm actually inviting you to think about being a boss in every aspect of your life, like every part of your life. And that, what I mean by that is that no one tells you who you are, one, and that you own it. And when you don't know, you step into inquiry and you self-interrogate around aspects of your life or circumstances where you're like, who am I in this space? Like, when I'm confronted with this particular challenge, who am I? And what do you're constantly stepping into noticing who you are and can own it, And that to me is like being like a boss.
Yeah.
Like no matter where I go, I have experienced, and the only evidence I have of this is because people tell me that I could be at a bar and have a very straight up conversation. I'm confident, I know, you know, and have very wicked conversations. And I'm like, you know what? I've thought about that, and this is how I feel about that. And I'm clear on this, and it's just like, we just had an amazing conversation because you have an amazing conversation with you because you happen to be someone who self-interrogates. Mm-hmm. You just don't come from a place of certainty and like, that's it, right? And you don't budge, and that like, no, you actually opened it up and like, oh, let's go left in this conversation because I'm curious. So it's curiosity, it's self-interrogation, it's growing, you know, and there is no destination, y'all. Like, there's no end point.
Yeah.
Like, you're all, like, bossing it up is, you know, an all day, everyday thing.
Yeah.
So, in all areas of your life. So, just know that. There is no end point. But I think the beauty of it is the self-inquiry that goes along with it. So, you know, it feeds into other parts of your life. Like you said, you know that you want to grow and nurture your staff and launch them.
Yeah.
And you know what it takes to thrive. So you, in your role as a leader, I'm the same way. I'm like, I know what it takes to thrive in this area called academic medicine. So everybody in my team, right, I care about them in a way that professionally, yes, we make sure you get your merit increases, you get your bonus,
Yeah.
you have your performance products, and then guess what? Like I ran my team meeting last week, and this notion of rest is resistance. There's a book by Tricia Henry. Mm-hmm. It's a Black theologian, historian, and it's called Rest is Resistance, the Manifesto. And she basically says, you know, we're so socialized into what's called the grind culture.
Yes.
Right? No, you know that.
Mm-hmm.
And the grind culture is rooted in capitalism and white supremacy ideology. And we have been socialized to grind. Like you said, we were raised. Work hard, work hard, work hard, work hard. Don't stop.
Yeah.
Hustle, hustle, hustle. So think about who's ever been a role model of resting in your life, right? We all come from hardworking families. I know my parents never rested. Mm-hmm. They didn't show me the beauty of naps and pausing and like, you know what, let's just take a moment here. No. Yeah. And so her point is rest is resistance. Yeah. And she says, you have to learn to say no because the systems will always say yes. Yes. You know, and even though, you know, aside from Cindy creating her own job, our jobs are not going to love us back.
No.
They're not. So know that, right? We're all being socialized to grind all day, every day. And it's a brilliant strategy because we get so tired that we stop. We burn out. Yeah. And so we don't learn how to have a strategy for sustained effort. Yeah. We burn out, and then we never had the impact that we wanted to have because now you had a heart attack. Yeah. Right? Or you've got, you know, some ailment that's getting in the way. Now you're disabled in some way. Think about the people you know in your life who are grinding, and then they stop because of a medical issue, a health issue. And so when do you find the time to actually pause and like think about what you feel, what you want, what you desire, what you care about, what you value? So you're never a boss in the grind culture. Does that make sense? And to rest is to actually stop grinding and reflect, and it gives you the opportunity to daydream. Yeah. It's free to dream, but when you're grinding and you have no time to dream, how could you ever boss it up?
I love that. Thank you so much, ladies. It was wonderful having you here and hearing all of your insight. I really appreciate it. Do we have any time for audience questions? Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
As the eldest daughter in my family, I would say my biggest issue is hyper-independence and not being able to ask for help. And I'm noticing that is really affecting just my success, but also like mental health, feeling alone, feeling isolated. So how do I overcome that? How do I learn to ask for help, learn to trust. Yeah.
Anybody?
I know firsthand. Being the eldest of five, totally understand, because you are to set the example, live by the example, be the parent, the support, the backup. And as, the boss lady doctor mentioned, said before, it is about being selfish. Sometimes you have to be selfish. And as she said, selfishness should not be seen in a negative way. And and understanding our support system and living in that life of grinding, it is hard, to say that and sort of like push back on our family circles, but you have to find that time and that space, and not looking as college opportunities as running and fleeing from that environment, because I'm sure in your mind you're on this like countdown clock. When I get to 18 or when I go to college, it's going to change. It is temporary, because even going off to college, you'll be back for Thanksgiving break months later, and the same circumstance and the same environment persists. So it's finding your voice in that moment, and being selfish and speaking up, and really finding a balance and compromise, and being an adult about it, and having those conversations and communicating. Because for me, it's coming from a family where you were to be seen and not heard kind of culture, which we many of us have grown up in, and finding our voice. And I'm fortunate to be a mother of two daughters, and communication is key, and I empower them to use their voice, which is, on the flip side with my family, when we go to family events and they think like my two girls are very outspoken because I ask their opinion, I solicit their feedback, because they are little people, and they have opinions, and they are, to be valued, and I want to empower them, just as much. So I implore you to communicate, convey, and speak up.
What is your name? Marlene. So I'm curious, Marlene, what do you think you should do?
Obviously, I should speak up and
Mm-hmm.
break out of that habit of I'll do it on my own. I can't trust anyone. Like learn to put my guard down.
Yeah. And what do you think is getting in the way of you doing that?
Not wanting to be let down or be disappointed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know what, Marlene? That's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. And as many times as it happens, it's going to also not happen. And over time, when you realize, and this is the self-interrogation piece. This is when you start to learn about yourself, because we've all been in that space.
Yeah.
And you realize who you learn. You start to figure out who you talk to, right? In many ways, I thought it was one person in my life that I was going to talk to, and then I realized that's not the right person. That is not the right person, because there's a pattern of an experience that I had with that person, which is like, you're not telling me what I really, because I asked this person and they knew. And the difference between the two, you start to pay attention. So I offer that is like, it's going to happen. You're going to be disappointed, but you'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But all we're saying is do it, like act.
Yeah.
Do it, just try it out. It's literally, you have to try it out. So I'm going to offer you a challenge, okay? If there is a thing that you're wrestling with right now and you need support, that by the end of the weekend, right, you ask someone for support. Try it out, okay? And then I only know, I know Leslie, but I know Maya. So I don't know if Maya, if Maya knows Marlene or whatever, but I would love to know how it went for you is my point. Okay? Will you take that challenge on? All right, cool.
Any other questions from the audience?
Hi, my name is Jennifer. I'm interested in learning financial literacy. I come from a Hispanic low-income family, and financial literacy was never like taught to us in school or anything like that. And I've learned that like the kind of route I want to take in life requires financial literacy. And I guess my question is, because I know you have a company that teaches about like budgeting and whatnot. I guess who's open, or who do you allow for those services to be given to?
I'm thinking Cindy.
Yeah, that's a great question. And money affects every single person in this room, right? Money is one of those unique things that affects every single person on this planet, no matter where you're from, your religion, your race, your nationality, it affects everyone. And that's why I am so passionate about it, because like you, I grew up with little to no financial literacy. I graduated law school with a very fancy, shiny law degree, and it said Juris Doctorate. Like I was like, ooh, yay, exciting. But I didn't know the first thing about investing or saving money or budgeting or anything like that. So for me, I think that part of the question is also like, how do I start, right? Like, where do I start? So I did write a book. The book came out in mid-November, and it's called Overcoming Debt, Achieving Financial Freedom. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, Amazon. I actually donated a copy to the program here that Thalia has. And, I would start there because that's where I started. I started with books, but you see, the books that I started with were written by white men, because that's what was offered to me, And then little by little, there have been more diversity, amongst authors in personal finance, which is really exciting. Not as much as we need, but there has been more. My book now is on the bookshelves too, which is really exciting. And it's a great place to start in terms of, how do I budget? How am I supposed to save money? How the heck do I start investing? Like, it's scary. It's this foreign world to me. And that's an excellent place to start. And then as you move along, so for example, I have a program called the Blueprint to Financial Freedom, which is a self-paced course that you can take online, and we have monthly group coaching meetings. So every month we meet once a month, and my coaching students ask me any questions on their mind. And we have a variety of students. We have ones that have just graduated college. We have ones that are currently in grad school. We have single parents. We have, dual income households. We have, a variety of students, but we're all there for a common mission, which is to just get better with money, get more confident with money. So I would definitely say where to start is books. That's how I started. Also, podcasts are wonderful. You're probably on social media, right? You probably all use social media. So then don't just follow social media influencers that live this like aspirational life that make you feel bad about yourself, because let's be honest, we all do it. Why don't you follow some that teach about money too, right? Well, follow me. And I think it's really important to start taking that initiative on your own, because no one's just going to serve it on a platter for you. So you kind of have to be the one to say, you know what, I'm ready. I'm going to do this. And there are so many resources out there, including free ones. Like I offer tons of free resources for my community too, including an electronic budget template that you can just download. It's free. You can start learning how to budget. A free video tutorial comes along with it. There are many resources out there. You just kind of need to, again, go out and look for them. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you to the students who asked questions. We love that. But we do have to wrap up. But can we get a round of applause for our panelists?